When the Spanish ships arrived on Philippine shores in the 16th century, they brought not just steel and sails, but the cross. With it came a promise of salvation. But that salvation had conditions. Abandon your gods, abandon your names, abandon your ways. For centuries, the story told to generations of Filipinos was simple: the cross saved them. From paganism, from ignorance. But was that truly the case? Look closer, and another story emerges. A story of disunity. A story of faith used as a political weapon. A story where ancient kinships were shattered by forced conversions, tribal alliances were manipulated by friars and conquistadors, and entire communities were turned against one another in the name of religion. This is not an attack on faith, but a confrontation with history. Because the arrival of Christianity in the Philippines didn't unite the islands under a single belief. It fractured them along lines of loyalty, to God or to land, to friar or to datu. This is the truth the textbooks rarely explore. Long before Magellan landed in Cebu, the islands of the Philippines already pulsed with spiritual life. Filipinos worshipped a pantheon of deities: Bathala in Luzon, Kabunian in the Cordilleras, and lesser spirits known as Anito or Diwata across Visayas and Mindanao. Ancestor veneration, nature worship, and ritual offerings were deeply tied to their daily lives and community values. These weren't chaotic or primitive beliefs, they were structured. The Babaylan, often women, were spiritual leaders, healers, and community advisors. Rituals weren't about domination, but balance, with the environment, with the dead, with unseen forces. Religion was local, personal, an extension of kinship and land. But that would soon change, not because of a spiritual awakening, but through military conquest cloaked in divine mission. When the Spanish arrived, they didn't just come as explorers, they came as missionaries backed by muskets. The union of church and crown was absolute. The Pope had granted Spain the right to colonize non-Christian lands under the doctrine of discovery. Conversion was not optional, it was the foundation of Spain's moral claim to the islands. In practice, this meant baptisms at sword point. Idols were destroyed, sacred groves burned, Babaylans were labeled witches or heretics. The old gods were demonized, their names stricken from oral memory. In their place rose images of saints, cathedrals, and the all-seeing eye of Christian order. The native datu who cooperated with the friars gained power. Those who resisted were crushed. Christianization was not just about saving souls, it was about restructuring society, replacing old loyalties with new ones. The cross became a wedge, dividing tribe from tribe, and often family from family. Resistance didn't die quietly. Across the archipelago, spiritual leaders led uprisings against colonial repression, often women, often Babaylanes. They weren't just fighting for freedom, they were fighting for the survival of indigenous identity. In 1660, the Tamblot revolt in Bohol was led by a Babaylan who claimed divine visions, calling people to reject Christianity and return to ancestral worship. The Spanish called it heresy. The people called it home. In Panay, Tapar, a former Catholic convert, proclaimed himself a messiah and led a revolt in the 1660s, reviving native rituals. In Mindoro and Mindanao, Moro leaders resisted Christianization entirely, preserving their Islamic or animist identities even as northern islands succumbed. To the Spanish, these were fanatics. To their people, they were prophets. The true power of colonization lay not in muskets, but in fragmentation. Spain realized early on that the Philippines was too vast, too decentralized, to control by force alone. So it exploited rivalries, between datus, between tribes, even between families. Conversion created a social caste. Those baptized became Indios, Spanish subjects. Those outside remained labeled as uncivilized. The church monopolized education, marriage, and burial. The converted gained access to land, protection, and social status. Resistance meant isolation, persecution, or death. Communities that once traded and intermarried began to distrust each other. A datu who refused baptism might see his kin converted and turned against him. Loyalty to land and lineage was replaced with loyalty to God, and to the friars who held the keys to heaven. Faith became a fault line. To consolidate power, the Spanish launched the Reducción system, a forced resettlement program. Filipinos were herded from scattered barangays into centralized towns centered around a church. This broke ancestral ties to land and ritual sites. The church became not only the spiritual hub, but the seat of surveillance. Under this system, friars controlled who could marry, who could own land, who could speak. They became de facto governors, often with more authority than civil officials. In some regions, Spanish priests banned native languages and festivals altogether. What had once been diverse expressions of spirituality across islands were compressed into rigid dogma. Christian doctrine was taught not as faith, but as law. Despite everything, Filipino faith endured, but not always in the way the friars intended. The Catholicism practiced in the Philippines today is deeply syncretic. Beneath the surface of novenas and fiestas lie echoes of pre-colonial rituals. Dances to call rain, prayers whispered to ancestors, amulets blessed by prayer and tradition. Even in devout communities, symbols like the Santo Niño, Black Nazarene, or Virgin of Antipolo carry meanings far deeper than European theology, because they've been indigenized. They are saints with native faces. At the same time, some Filipinos have sought to reclaim what was lost, reviving Babylon practices, relearning Baybayin, rediscovering Anitos not as idols, but as memory. The cross came with conquest, but the soul of the people endured. The cross did not save the Philippines in the way history books once claimed. It didn't simply wash away ignorance and sin. It didn't bind the islands into one harmonious Christian nation. What it did was divide. By creed, by loyalty, by access to power. But that's not the end of the story. Filipino faith today is neither wholly Catholic nor fully pre-colonial. It is something uniquely resilient. A fusion born of trauma, yes, but also of cultural survival. What was once imposed became adapted. What was once used for control became, in some places, a source of liberation. To understand this history is not to reject the cross, it is to recognize the full truth of how it arrived. Only then can a people reclaim not just their faith, but their story.